the air was thick with morning silence, broken only by the faint hum of insects and the distant whisper of wind across Mount Nzawi's jagged mouth. The volcano had slept for generations, but its presence loomed over the village like an elder who listened even when unseen. The people believed the mountain watched everything: births, betrayals, deaths. Today, it watched a child carry a calabash of water with trembling hands. Akila, just 10 years old, walked barefoot across the dusty compound, her small frame wrapped in a thin cloth smeared with streaks of soot and leaf pulp. Her arms ached from fetching water, but she said nothing. Her eyes, wide and somber, were fixed on the hut where her mother lay waiting. It was a sacred bath. Not one for cleansing dirt or cooling heat, but for easing the soul from bone. No one else had come to help. No neighbors. No healers. Just her. Inside the hut, the air was heavy with incense and grief. A pot of herbs steamed quietly on a clay stove, filling the space with a scent that stung the nose, bittersweet like crushed bark and dying flowers. Her mother, Langa, lay on a straw mat, her once strong frame now sunken and still, but her eyes remained fierce. Fire still flickered in them, though her voice had grown faint, like smoke curling from the last ember. "You came," Langa whispered as Akila entered, placing the calabash gently beside her. Akila nodded, her voice locked somewhere behind her ribs. She knelt and dipped a carved gourd into the warm water, steam curling around her fingers. Slowly, she began pouring it over her mother's feet, washing away days of fever and dust. Langa smiled weakly and raised a trembling hand to stroke Akila's hair. "There's strength in your fingers," she murmured. "Your blood knows what's coming." Akila looked up. "What's coming, Mama?" Langa didn't answer right away. She reached beside her and pulled forward a bundle wrapped in red cloth. From it, she retrieved a handful of dried herbs, blackened leaves and white ashes mixed with bits of glowing coal dust. She crumbled them into the bath water. The water hissed, sending up thick steam. It rose unnaturally slow, swirling like it carried secrets. "These are from the mountain's edge," Langa said, voice rasping now. "From the place where fire sleeps. Only the women of our line know how to use them." Akila frowned. "The other women say it's cursed." Langa laughed softly, the sound more breath than voice. "They fear what they don't carry. Our blood doesn't burn in fire, it listens to it." As Akila poured more water over her mother's shoulders, Langa began to sing. "I am low, haunting," sung in the language of ash and flame. The kind that wasn't taught but remembered. Akila didn't know the words, but something in her bones did. The walls of the hut seemed to pulse with the melody. Even the fire in the stove dimmed, as if listening. Langa's eyes fluttered. "Ashes are not the end," she whispered. "They're what breathes the flame. You remember that, Akila. When the time comes, you'll feel it in your chest, like smoke trying to speak." Suddenly, her body stiffened. Her head tilted back. Her mouth opened, and with one last exhale, a long, foggy breath left her lips. It rose into the air and hovered above the bathwater. For a heartbeat, the steam in the hut turned pitch black. Akila froze. The shadows twisted. Then just as quickly, the steam cleared, as if nothing had happened. "Mama," she whispered. But Langa didn't answer. Her body had gone still, her face peaceful in a way that frightened Akila more than any fever ever had. The hut was silent again, too silent. Akila stared at her mother, the warmth of her touch already fading from her skin. Outside, the villagers did not come to mourn. Some whispered that Langa had practiced strange fire rites. That the mountain had claimed her. No one wanted to touch the body. No one offered food or songs. Akila stayed beside her mother through the night, watching the coals die out and the water grow cold. When the burial was done, her father returned, not with a heavy heart but with a new wife. Mama Nyoka was beautiful in the way that snakes were, smooth, sharp-eyed, coiled with intentions she never said aloud. She didn't weep at Langa's grave. She looked down at Akila and narrowed her eyes, as if searching for something beneath her skin. "She's strange," Nyoka said to the father that evening. That child didn't cry. Not once. She just stared at the steam like it spoke to her. She's quiet. Like her mother, he muttered. Or cursed. Like her mother, Nyoka snapped. Akila was taken into their new home, but not as a daughter. Her room was the corner near the hearth. Her bed was a mat rolled beside the firewood. Mama Nyoka gave her chores, cold stares, and silence. She told the other women that the child must not be spoiled. She needs to learn her place, she said. That girl carries something in her blood, and it's not obedience. And so, Akila watched. She listened. She remembered the steam that turned black. The song her mother sang. And in quiet moments, when the fire burned low and the shadows danced along the wall, she whispered back into the embers, just to see if they were listening. The years folded into one another like burnt leaves blown across dry ground. Since her mother's death, Akila's world had shrunk into corners, corners of rooms, corners of conversations, corners of thought. She no longer walked in the center of anything. Mama Nyoka had made sure of that. By the time Akila turned 12, she was already stooped like a much older woman, her hands calloused from sweeping soot and pounding cassava, her back used to curling into herself so she would not be noticed. The once vibrant child who had sung with her mother and whispered into embers now moved quietly, her bare feet soft against the dusty floor, her eyes hollow from watching too much and speaking too little. Her father had become a shadow, a voice that echoed sometimes from the other room, a presence that moved past her without pausing. Always away for trade, always too tired to ask questions. When he returned, Mama Nyoka filled his ears with praises, complaints, and invented illnesses. She kept his plate full and his mind empty. He never noticed the bruises on Akila's wrist. Or if he did, he never asked where they came from. Akila was not allowed to eat with the family. She waited by the wall while Mama Nyoka and her daughter, Nalwazi, ate from carved wooden bowls, laughing and flicking their fingers when they wanted more. Nalwazi, barely a year older than Akila, wore fine wrappers and perfumed oil, and sat on animal skins while Akila knelt to wash her feet. She had grown soft and sharp at the same time, her nails polished with crushed berries, her tongue always ready to sting. She smells like burnt wood, Nalwazi would say, wrinkling her nose. She's like a walking hearth. It's disgusting. Mama Nyoka would only nod. It's her mother's blood. Curses cling like smoke. No matter how many times Akila scrubbed herself, the smell of ash clung to her. It lived in her pores, her hair, under her fingernails. Her clothes were always grayed with soot. Even when she rinsed in cold river water at dawn, never the sacred pool, which was forbidden to her, the villagers still turned their faces away. She sleeps in the ashes, one of the women whispered at the market. That girl must have fire under her skin. Look at her eyes. Hollow like something's waiting to come out. The children called her Mshuma, Candlewick. They said she'd catch flame one day and vanish in smoke. Akila didn't respond. She no longer cried. She no longer begged. But at night, when the house grew still and only the fire whispered low in the hearth, she would sit in silence, watching the last coals blink like tired eyes. That was where she felt most alive, among the ashes. One night, long after Nalwazi had gone to sleep and Mama Nyoka's snoring had settled into a rhythm, Akila sat beside the dying fire, tracing circles in the ash with one finger. The embers pulsed softly. She closed her eyes. And then, there it was. A voice. Faint. Dry like wind over bone. It didn't speak in words, not at first. It hummed. A tune she knew without knowing. A melody that made the ashes rise and sway. Her eyes snapped open. The hearth was still. But something had changed. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay curled on her mat beside the fire, watching the gray drift and settle, waiting for the voice again. And when the wind howled outside and the branches scratched against the roof, she thought she heard it again. Patience, child, patience. The next evening, it happened again. This time, clearer. The ash remembers. The ash sees. Her fingers trembled. She pressed her ear to the floor, eyes wide in the flickering light. She whispered, "Who are you?" Only the crackle of the last log answered. Until something moved behind her. Slowly, silently, a shadow slithered across the floor. A snake. Long, black, its scales dull like coal. It slid toward her, not threatening, curious. She should have screamed. She should have reached for a stick or fled to Mama Nyoka's room. But something in her knew not to run. The snake stopped beside the hearth and curled into itself, resting its head near the warm ash. Akila stared. The serpent's eyes were like polished onyx, calm, ancient. She whispered, "Waco," without knowing why. The name simply came, carried on that strange ancestral wind. From that night on, Waco returned again and again. Always at night. Always when the fire was low. It would curl beside her mat, or sometimes disappear into the ashes entirely. She never fed it, never touched it, but it stayed. She told no one. Especially not Mama Nyoka. Over the next few months, something began to shift in her. She still served her stepsister and swept the floors and scrubbed the chamber pots, but she did it with a strange clarity, as if each act were a step in a ritual. As if endurance were part of a plan. The voices returned often now, clearer in the cold hours before dawn. "You are not hidden. You are being prepared. The ashes where flame is born." Akila started to speak to the fire. In whispers. In thoughts. Sometimes in the rhythm of her breath. The flames responded, not in words, but in movement. They danced when she exhaled slowly. They flared when her hands passed over them. It wasn't magic. Not yet. But it was something. One morning, while sweeping the compound, she found a scorch mark on the inside of her left wrist, small, circular, and black. It hadn't burned her. There was no pain. It had simply appeared. She stared at it for a long time, then pulled her sleeve down. She didn't tell anyone. Mama Nyoka began to grow uneasy. The snake had never been seen by her, but she began to notice how Akila never flinched anymore. How her eyes no longer looked away. She began sprinkling dried salt near the hearth. She burned bitter herbs in the kitchen and muttered prayers under her breath. "She's too quiet," Nyoka told the village healer one day. "Too watchful. The fire near her never crackles." The healer only raised his brow. Sometimes, the hottest flame is the one that waits. Akila swept the floor that evening with calm precision. Waco lay hidden, her scar burned faintly beneath her sleeve, and in the ashes behind her, the whispers continued. Soon. The drums had begun their restless thunder at dusk, echoing through the hills like footsteps of something ancient and blind. The village was alight with celebration. Nalwazi's engagement had stirred gossip, envy, and admiration in equal measure. The nobleman she was to marry, a rich cattle heir from beyond the river, had sent gifts too lavish for the village to ignore: silk wrappers, carved ivory bracelets, even a box of imported perfume that made the elders shake their heads in quiet awe. Mama Nyoka preened in public as if she were the one being chosen. Her steps were proud, her lips painted crimson, her laughter sharp as a knife. She walked with her arm looped in her daughter's, pulling her forward like a prize to be paraded. Akila stood quietly behind them, a bundle of damp towels and fragrant herbs clutched in her arms. The bath was to be drawn in the sacred house, the same place Akila had washed her mother years ago, though no one dared mention it now. The bathhouse sat on the edge of the compound, fed by a channel that drew warm mineral water from beneath the mountain itself. It was tradition: before a girl was married, she was to be purified in its healing waters. The spring was believed to cleanse the body of unwanted spirits and prepare it for fertility, beauty, and grace. Mama Nyoka turned to Akila just as the sun began to drop below the trees. "You will prepare it," she said. Akila's hands didn't shake. She only nodded and walked the familiar path to the bathhouse, her eyes catching glimpses of villagers stringing red beads onto branches, painting symbols on the ground, preparing sweetmeats for the guests. But none of it touched her. Her mind was full of water and memory and the whispering hum that had grown louder in recent weeks. Inside the bathhouse, she moved like someone following unseen instructions. She filled the tub with hot water, sprinkled dried petals into it, and stirred in ground herbs for fragrance. The steam rose quickly, thick and slow, wrapping itself around her arms like silk. When she was done, she stepped back. The tub shimmered in the candlelight. She was turning to fetch Nawazi when Mama Nyoka entered, alone. "You've done well," Nyoka said, her voice low and honeyed. "It's beautiful." Akila bowed her head slightly. "Shall I call Nawazi?" Nyoka shook her head. "No. Not yet. There's something else." She stepped forward, smoothing her hands over her wrapper. Her eyes were strange, soft in a way that made Akila uneasy. "You've served this house quietly, haven't you?" she said. Akila didn't answer. Nyoka continued, circling the edge of the tub. "I've watched you, girl. You never complain. You never argue. You hide in soot, like a rat. But still you look at me with those eyes. Like your mother used to." Akila stiffened. Nyoka's lips curled. "But I'm generous. And today is a special day. You may bathe first, Akila. As a reward." Akila blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "You've worked hard. Don't you want to feel clean? Just once?" Nyoka said. "You may use the bride's bath. I permit it." The words settled into Akila's chest like stones. She looked at the water. It was beautiful, glowing with the warmth of the mountain, alive with scent. Her throat tightened. It had been years since she'd felt water like that against her skin. She hesitated only a moment before slipping out of her soot-streaked wrap and stepping in. The heat was perfect. She sank slowly, letting it rise past her shoulders. Her eyes fluttered closed. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she allowed herself to relax. She breathed in deeply, the scent of flowers and salt and earth filling her lungs. She didn't see Mama Nyoka reach into the cloth pouch at her side. She didn't hear the whispered curse under her breath. The first handful of ash hit the water like a slap. Akila gasped. Another handful followed, thicker, darker, laced with something strange. Bone dust. Cursed herbs. The crushed teeth of a dead jackal. And something else, something that stank of the grave. The water changed. It turned gray. Then darker. It bubbled and thickened. The scent of herbs was drowned by the smell of rot and smoke. Akila tried to rise, but her limbs were heavy. Her skin began to itch, then to burn. "Mama," she croaked, but her voice caught. Nyoka stood at the edge of the tub, her expression calm and cruel. "Your mother bathed in this house before death. Now so shall you. But you? You won't rise again." Akila gasped for air, but the steam choked her. It curled into her mouth, her nose, her throat. Her vision blurred. Her skin peeled at the edges, red and raw. "Do you feel it?" Nyoka whispered. "This is what happens when curses pretend to be daughters." Akila thrashed once, her arms flailing in the dark water. And then she stopped. The surface stilled. Mama Nyoka stood watching for a moment longer. Then she called in 2 guards. "Take the body," she said. "Dump it in the volcanic forest. Tell the villagers she drowned in shame after defiling the bride's bath." The guards obeyed without question. They carried her limp, scorched body into the night and left it beneath a crooked tree near the base of Mount Nzawi. The air was colder there, full of mist and strange noises. They didn't linger. Long after they were gone, the forest stirred. Fog rolled in thick and unnatural. The trees bent, not from wind, but from something heavier, like the mountain exhaling. Akila's body lay still, her mouth open, skin pale. Then something moved in the grass. A slither. Mwako. The black snake emerged from the shadows and glided toward her. It curled beside her for a moment, then rose up and slid slowly along her chest, up to her lips. It paused. Then it entered. Into her mouth. Into her throat. The wind picked up. The mist swirled. Akila's chest rose once. Then again. Her eyes snapped open. Black smoke poured from her mouth. She sat up with a gasp so deep it echoed across the forest like a drumbeat. Her skin still bore burns, but they no longer bled. The mist clung to her body like armor. She looked around, blinking slowly. The night whispered. She inhaled, and exhaled smoke, thick and dark. The girl who had entered the bath a servant had died. What rose from the volcanic earth now was something else entirely. The forest around Mount Nzawi was older than the stories carved into the stones of the first village. Trees twisted with roots like gripping fingers, moss clung to bark like old memory, and the wind rarely whispered, only watched. It was into this breathless wilderness that Akila stumbled, barefoot, her body trembling from something too deep to name. She couldn't remember how long she had lain in the dark fog beneath the volcano. Time had melted. Her skin felt like it belonged to someone else, raw but reborn. Her breath came in bursts, each exhale trailing black smoke that curled and vanished in the cold morning air. She moved through the undergrowth slowly, dazed, like someone walking in a dream. Birds above stilled when she passed. A buck paused mid-leap and turned its head to look at her, then lowered its antlers, not in fear, but deference. A wild dog, lean and yellow-eyed, stepped into her path, hackles raised, then lowered its head and retreated into the shadows without a sound. She was not hungry. Not cold. The wind circled her body but never touched her skin directly, as though the air feared what she had become. She passed a hot spring bubbling up from deep underground. Steam rose from it, thick and steady. When she leaned over its surface, her reflection was wrong, smoke instead of hair, eyes darker than night, and behind her, faint shapes flickering inside the fog. Not people. Not animals. Spirits. At first, she thought they were memories, phantoms of pain. But when she blinked, they remained. One of them raised her hand in a gesture Akila remembered well, her mother's way of blessing a child before sleep. "Mother," she whispered. The spirit didn't answer, but the steam thickened around it, embracing the shape. Others began to appear, tall women cloaked in ashen flame, some holding staffs of bone, others with necklaces that glowed like coals. They hovered in the smoke, watching her. Akila reached out, but her hand passed through. Still, they did not vanish. One of them, a woman with silver hair made entirely of smoke, lifted a finger to her lips. Silence. Wait. Watch. The steam swirled as Akila pulled away. She understood now, the smoke did not only follow her. It responded. It listened. Later that night, she tried to speak aloud again. Her voice came out hollow, soft at first, but the trees rustled in reply. She whispered the word fire, and a distant candle flickered in the ruins of an abandoned shrine. She said ash, and the dust near her feet lifted, forming a slow-moving spiral that followed her footsteps like a shadow with breath. She began to travel the outer villages by night, keeping to paths not walked in generations. Her feet touched the ground, but barely. With each step, her outline shimmered, her ankles left trails of smoke that never fully faded. In the third village she passed, an elder saw her silhouette under the moonlight and dropped his staff, calling out in trembling awe, "Mwana wa Moshi, daughter of smoke." Word spread fast, as it always does in places where mystery tastes better than truth. A girl who walked in fog. A child whose breath made lamps flicker. A girl-shaped shadow seen in reflections but never fully present in the flesh. Some said she was cursed. Others whispered she was chosen. At a village near the base of the volcano, a caravan of traders was ambushed by night bandits. Screams rang out under the moon. Fires were stomped out. The bandits, merciless and wild-eyed, tore through the wagons, taking food, fabric, whatever they could find. And then smoke drifted across the clearing, though no fire had been lit. The mist curled from the trees, slow and dense. A shape emerged, neither running nor afraid. The bandits paused, confused, then raised weapons. But she didn't stop walking. The first man to approach her staggered back before he touched her. His face blistered, not from flame, but from heatless smoke. His scream echoed as he fell to his knees, clawing at his eyes. The second tried to shoot an arrow. But before he could let it fly, the string on his bow frayed, crumbled into ash. The rest ran, stumbling over each other. When the villagers emerged the next morning, they found their wagon safe, untouched, save for a spiral of black soot drawn perfectly in a circle around the site. A single footprint in the center. Smaller than a grown man's. Still warm to the touch. "Akila," one woman whispered. "It must have been her." "Didn't she die?" someone asked. "Not all deaths are endings," the elder replied. "Some are returns." Soon, in every village around the mountain, fires were lit not just for warmth or cooking, but for speaking. People began sprinkling ash into flames before prayers. Children were told not to mock smoke. Old women claimed if you whispered into the hearth with the right words, Akila might hear you. Might even answer. No one dared say Mama Nyoka's name aloud in public. The villagers did not know exactly what had happened, only that Akila had vanished in the bride's bath and returned in mist. Fear lingered in those who had mocked her. Some even placed offerings near fire pits, bits of cloth, dried petals, and small bowls of crushed coal. Akila watched all this from the distance, her body wrapped in a new garment she had made herself, dyed with soot, stitched with bone thread from a carcass the spirits had led her to. The cloak rippled like vapor, always moving. Beneath its folds, her breath stayed low and steady, and the scar on her wrist, once a circle, now glowing faintly, pulsed with each step. Her journey led her in a wide circle around the volcano's base, back toward the village she once called home. She did not walk quickly. There was no need. The mountain knew she was coming. So did the fire. And deep in the shadows of the trees, Waco slithered silently beside her, never far behind. Night fell heavy on the village of Nzawi, not with the softness of dusk but with a weight that made animals go quiet and even the most foolish men walk home early. The moon was choked behind clouds, and the wind carried a bitter scent, like scorched wood before the flame. Akila stood just outside the village boundary, draped in her soot-colored cloak. The fabric moved even when the air did not. She had returned, but not as a daughter, not as a servant, not even as a ghost. She had come as smoke. The village had changed little. Same winding paths. Same gnarled trees. Same cracked drums leaning beside the elders' stools. But the air around the houses near her old home felt stretched thin, like the space between two things not meant to touch. She walked without sound, her bare feet barely disturbing the dirt, her presence leaving a vapor trail behind her that faded slowly, but not completely. At the edge of her old compound, she stood beneath the cover of a tree and watched. Mama Nyoka was dancing. Before a small crowd of villagers, she stood barefoot in front of a fire pit, tossing herbs into the flames with great theatricality. "I call out spirits that cling to the living. I command the ash to retreat. I purify this house." The fire cracked loudly, though not naturally. Akila could see the small pouch tied to Nyoka's belt, the one filled with powdered gunroot, which she tossed into the fire to make it pop. A trick. A show. And the villagers, fearful and fascinated, watched her every move. Behind her stood Nawazi, dressed in bridal fabric, her face pale beneath the ceremonial paint. The wedding was 3 days away, and already whispers had begun. Nawazi had not slept through a full night in weeks. She screamed sometimes, babbling of smoke hands pulling her from her dreams, of water that boiled without heat. Of singing from the walls. Some said she was simply nervous. Others said something far older had returned. Akila saw her sister's eyes as she stood behind Mama Nyoka, empty, distant, blinking too slowly. She was being led toward a life she didn't understand, chained by a lie that wore perfume and jewelry. That night, Akila entered the house unseen. The doors did not creak. The floor did not groan. Smoke seeped under the thresholds before her, announcing nothing. She drifted room to room, and with each breath she exhaled, she filled the corners with a light, gray mist that clung to rafters and walls. It began with whispers. Soft ones, the kind that tug at the edge of sleep. The lullabies her mother used to hum. Songs no one remembered until they did, suddenly, in the middle of the night with goosebumps on their skin. Mama Nyoka woke to the smell of ash in her sleeping chamber. The fire in her room had long gone cold, but smoke hung in the air. She sat up sharply, heart racing, and shouted for the guards. But by the time they entered, the smoke had vanished. "I told you she was haunting me," she hissed. The next morning, she burned herbs. Bundles of thistle, dried yam stalks, goat hair tied with red string. She chanted loud enough for the neighbors to hear. But when she brought the flame to the bundle, the match hissed out. Then the second. Then the third. The smoke would not obey her. By the second night, the compound had grown cold. A mist lingered in the corridors. Nawasi screamed in her sleep again, clawing at her throat, gasping for air that was not strangling her. The servants found ashes in her bedsheets. It wasn't long before the whispers reached the market. "She's back," they said. "The one they left in the forest?" "No, not back. Just here. Watching." Mama Nyoka ordered charms nailed into every doorway, made the guards sleep with stones under their pillows, but the smoke did not leave. And then came the bathhouse. On the third night, Nawasi entered the sacred bath at her mother's insistence, trembling but obedient. "You must cleanse yourself," Mama Nyoka said. "Your dreams are too loud." The bath had been drawn carefully. Warmed with river stones, scented with lemongrass and crushed flowers. Nawasi stepped in and sat still, hugging her knees. And from the steam, Akila emerged. She didn't walk. She rose. Her outline formed as the fog curled around itself, pulling her shape together with perfect, fluid grace. Nawasi looked up, and her scream did not come. Only breath. Shallow and fast. Her lips trembled. Akila's face was calm. Her hair floated like black mist. Her eyes glowed faintly in the candlelight, not red, but a deep ember orange, alive, watching, burning slow. The water around Nawasi began to shimmer. Then bubble. Slowly at first. Then faster. She scrambled out, dripping, screaming, slipping on the floor. "She's here," she shrieked. "She's here, Akila's here," she rose. Mama Nyoka came running, half-dressed, her guards behind her. But when they burst in, there was nothing but steam. That was the final spark. By the next day, the elders called a gathering in the central square. The air was thick with expectation and unease. Everyone had heard something by now, either from a servant's mouth or in a dream. Children stared wide-eyed. Women clutched charms. The drummers didn't play. Mama Nyoka stood in front of the elders, her wrapper perfect, her face tight. Nawasi sat beside her, eyes red, arms folded around herself like she could squeeze the fear away. Elder Bako raised his staff. "Too many shadows fall on your house, Nyoka. Spirits do not move without cause." Mama Nyoka raised her voice. "This is nonsense. A jealous spirit, perhaps, but not Akila. That child died from her own shame. She polluted the bride's bath. Her body was buried. Let the dead stay buried. I am not buried." The voice silenced the square. Every lamp, every torch, every lantern, went out at once. People gasped. Some cried out. Even Elder Bako's staff dimmed. From the thickened air, Akila stepped forward. Smoke rolled behind her, not from any fire. Her cloak billowed like it was underwater. Her breath left dark ribbons of vapor. Mweko slithered silently behind her, unseen by all but the very old, who recognized the spirit form. Akila did not shout. She did not accuse. She simply looked at Mama Nyoka and said, "Tell them what you did." Mama Nyoka backed away. She's not real, she whispered. Akila took another step. Tell them how you poured bones into the water. How you crushed herbs meant for curses, not cleansing. How you watched me drown. People turned to Nyoka. They watched her face change, not all at once, but in cracks. Her mouth opened. No words came. Her lips moved. Silence. Akila raised a hand. You wanted to banish me with ash. But the ash knows me. It carries the truth. Smoke rose around them, forming not just shapes, but memories. Images. Mama Nyoka by the bath, pouring powder. Akila sinking. Guards dragging a body. Nawazi watching, pale and guilty. The crowd gasped. A woman fainted. The elders whispered among themselves. Elder Bako stepped forward. Do you deny this, Nyoka? But Mama Nyoka fell to her knees. Her voice was gone. Her hands trembled. And then, before everyone, her skin began to flake, not like rot, but like something burned too long. She screamed. Ash fell from her mouth. Akila turned. The wind picked up. The smoke followed her like a cloak of wings. And the silence she left behind was heavier than fire. The village gathered in a hushed ring beneath the shadow of Mount Zawi, where steam coiled eternally from the earth's cracks. The sacred volcanic spring had not been used in generations, its waters too hot, too deep, too haunted. But for judgment, it was the only place old enough to remember truth. The elders stood cloaked in ceremonial cloth, faces drawn with age and awe, watching as three figures approached the spring. Akila walked first, wrapped in soot-dyed robes that whispered as she moved. The wind circled her gently, tugging at her cloak as if the mountain itself breathed through it. Her eyes were calm. Her footsteps trailed black smoke that curled across the stone like ink in water. Behind her came Nawazi, her head lowered, hands trembling at her sides. She had not spoken since the vision in the bathhouse, since the smoke had shown her what no lie could bury. The color had not returned to her cheeks, but she walked without being pulled. Mama Nyoka followed last, flanked by two guards, her spine straight and her jaw locked. She wore white, a mockery of purity, and her wrists gleamed with gold charms clinking softly with every step. She smiled to the crowd as if it were her festival. She is possessed, she said, voice loud and steady. What you saw yesterday was not Akila, it was a spirit using her skin. And yet, said Elder Bako, she speaks with the fire, and the fire does not burn her. Let the spring judge. The spring bubbled faintly, its surface smooth as glass. It sat in a stone basin carved by the ancestors, wreathed in thin steam. Every few moments, a low rumble could be heard beneath it, like a heartbeat too old to die. The ritual required all three to enter. No words. No incantations. Only presence. Truth, the elders believed, could not lie to water pulled from the belly of a mountain. Akila stepped forward. She untied her cloak, folded it neatly, and let it fall. Beneath, her skin bore faint marks of old burns, a circular scar still glowing faintly on her wrist. She climbed into the pool, slowly, without flinching, though the water was near scalding. As she submerged herself, steam rose around her shoulders. She exhaled. Black smoke drifted from her lips and curled above the water like a veil. But the surface remained calm. Not a single ripple. Elder Bako leaned forward. The mountain is watching, he murmured. Next, Nawazi was called. She hesitated. Her gaze met Akila's for the first time in years. Not with pride. Not with cruelty. Only a girl who had followed lies too long and now stood at their edge. She stepped in, trembling as the heat bit at her skin. Tears welled in her eyes. She closed them. Then opened them again. No smoke rose from her. No ash. No flame. And still, the water held her, still and silent. Then it was Mama Nyoka's turn. She stepped forward slowly, then removed her wrappers, stepping bare into the spring with practiced grace. She smiled again, but there was tightness at the edges of her mouth. The moment her foot touched the water, a ripple spread. Then another. The steam thickened. And suddenly, the water began to darken. Slowly at first, just a shadow beneath her feet. Then faster. Gray. Then deeper. Then black. The air grew heavy, and the villagers stepped back. Some covered their mouths. Others gasped. The spring began to hiss. Bubbles rose to the surface. Not water bubbles, ash. The water was turning to ash. Mama Nyoka's eyes widened. She tried to step back, but the water gripped her ankles. Smoke erupted from beneath her, and her scream pierced the sky. Her skin began to split, not with blood, but with scales. Her spine arched. Her fingers lengthened. From her back rose a shimmer, a shifting silhouette, part woman, part serpent, coils flickering in and out of view. Her face twisted, her smile gone, her teeth lengthening. "She is not healer," one of the elders cried. "She is what her mother warned us of, half-creature, born from betrayal." Mama Nyoka writhed in the ashen pool, thrashing as steam rose in thick waves. Akela stepped forward again, her eyes like lit coals, calm amidst the chaos. She opened her mouth, and whispered a single word. "Enough." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. But it moved like thunder. The air shifted. The ash stilled. And in the next breath, Mama Nyoka disintegrated. Her form collapsed into dust mid-scream, her serpent tail turning to smoke, her bracelets falling into the pool with a hollow plink. The wind rose, sharp, sudden. It swept through the clearing and carried the dust into the sky. No trace remained. Only silence. Akela stepped out of the spring. Her skin steamed, but she was untouched. The water behind her slowly returned to its clear state, the ash dissolved as though it had never been there. Elder Bako bowed his head. The villagers followed. No one cheered. There was no need. Justice had already spoken. And it spoke in ash, in smoke, in wind. Akela stood before them, not as a girl returned from death, but as a woman reborn through fire. Not a witch. Not a spirit. But the living judgment of blood wronged. And above them, Mountain Zawi rumbled softly in approval. The village at the base of Mountain Zawi no longer whispered out of fear, they whispered out of reverence. The screams had ended. The judgments had passed. The spring had boiled, and justice had turned to ashen wind. What remained now was memory, and in that memory, Akela stood eternal, not as a ghost, not as a girl, but as something deeper, a breath between worlds. It began quietly. The day after the trial, Akela returned to the ruined bathhouse. The door hung crooked. The stones were blackened, scarred with ash, the basin still echoing the last cries of a woman who had once tried to kill her. Where others would have razed it to the ground, Akela only sat in the middle of the scorched floor, let the sun rise through its cracks, and waited. When the villagers came, first out of curiosity, then offering to help, she accepted with a nod. No speeches. No commands. She lifted stones with them. Carried herbs from the market. Her silence guided them more firmly than orders ever could. Within 2 weeks, the bathhouse was not just rebuilt, it was reborn. The sacred pool, once reserved only for the elite or the blessed, was now open to the poor, the sick, the forgotten. Orphans bathed where nobles once had. A widow who hadn't washed in clean water in 5 years stepped into the steaming spring and wept. A boy with scars from a past no one spoke of now sat each day beside the basin, humming the lullabies Akela once sang in ash. People came from neighboring villages not just to witness the new shrine, but to feel something. They walked through misted paths, touched the stones still warm with memory, and whispered her name, Akela. But few called her that anymore. She was now she who rose breathing smoke. Nawazi did not flee. She stayed. Her wedding was quietly cancelled. The nobleman's caravan returned his gifts in silence, no shame, no blame. Nawazi, once proud and perfumed, cut her hair, removed her jewels, and took up daily care of the spring. She cleaned the stones each morning before sunrise. She lit candles with her own hands. And when people asked who she was, she bowed her head and said simply, "A servant of the smoke." Akela said nothing about it. There was no need. She sat, most days, in the back chamber of the new bathhouse, a throne carved from dark volcanic stone beneath a curtain of mist. Waco, her snake guardian, coiled at the base, unmoving for hours unless Akela's breath stirred him. The villagers learned to fear that moment, the rise of her chest, the soft exhale that made the fog ripple. When she did speak, it was only once or twice a week, and even then, only when silence had already said enough. One afternoon, her father returned. Grayed at the temples, thinner than she remembered. He stepped through the gates of the bathhouse, barefoot, eyes hollow. The villagers watched but did not speak. He walked across the stone path slowly, stopping before the chamber where Akela sat. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His hands shook. "Akela," he whispered, voice cracking, I didn't know." Akela said nothing. She simply inhaled, and exhaled. Smoke drifted from her lips, curling through the air like a ribbon. It didn't choke. It didn't blind. But it filled the space between them, thick with things unspoken, the years of silence, the weight of betrayal, the nights he had turned away when she needed him most. His knees folded beneath him. And there, in the shadow of the spring he had once ignored, he wept. Not for forgiveness. Just to be seen. Akela watched. And when she finally rose, placing a hand on his head, it was not to bless or punish, but to mark that she remembered. That was enough. In time, the villagers carved symbols into trees along the volcanic paths, small spirals with 3 rings, one for each phase of her story: ash, smoke, flame. Children were told not to lie near the hearth, not because it was dangerous, but because the ashes whispered when they were close. Women who had been wronged walked barefoot to the spring and left pieces of their old lives in the pool, rings, wrappers, even braids of hair, watching them dissolve into the heat. And every year, on the day the bathhouse had burned, a ritual was held. Candles were lit in silence. No songs. Only breath. People lined up to speak a single truth into the smoke, then stepped back, letting it carry their pain upward, where the wind always waited. Akela never attended the ceremony. She didn't need to. She was already in the smoke. In the breath between confession and freedom. In the quiet awe of children staring into the hearth, wondering if they might see her eyes watching back. She had become what her mother whispered long ago: ashes are not the end. They are what breathes the flame. And now she was the smoke that watched. Long after the fire faded from memory and the stone of the bathhouse cooled, the stories still moved like wind between branches. Children huddled near hearths and listened wide-eyed as elders recounted the tale of the girl who did not burn, who breathed black smoke, who came back from death with silence sharper than any scream. Never pour ashes on the innocent, they warned, voices low and certain. They may rise with breath you cannot swallow. And in the village near Mount Nzawi, no one threw away ashes lightly. Every hearth was tended with care. Smoke was respected, not waved away. If a girl cried alone beside a fire, old women left her alone, because sometimes, the smoke around her trembled too perfectly. Far beyond the village, beyond the river and the stone bridges, a wandering prince once passed through with his guard and his gold-threaded robes. He stopped for water and heard whispers of a spring that could cleanse anything: guilt, grief, even fate. But it was not the water that caught his eye. It was the smoke. At twilight, just before the mountain swallowed the sun, he saw it, rising not in a spiral, not in a straight pillar, but in a shape. The outline of a girl dancing, arms raised, head bowed, the coils of mist twirling around her like ribbons. He stepped toward it. The guards called out, but he didn't stop. They say he followed the smoke past the edge of the path, into the thicket where the old spirits hum. They say he vanished without a sound. Not even footprints remained. Some say Akela took his name. Others say she's choosing. Not a king. Not a husband. But a witness. In uncertain nights, when the wind is too still and the moon too full, villagers claim they see something above the bathhouse, something more than steam. Wings. Not bird wings. Wings made of smoke, vast and slow and silent. They stretch into the sky, and they do not flap. They simply hover, curling through the stars like a warning written in air. No one dares approach when the wings rise. The water bubbles without fire. The snake coils around the stone as if guarding a temple. And in the stillness, the mist sings. Not with words. With memory. A song passed from the mouth of a dying mother to the breath of a burning girl. And always, always, the same final line whispered near dying coals, in homes where the hearth has gone dark. They tried to drown her in ashes, but she became their fire.